Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I hope this finds you well. This week's Parsha is a double portion, Vayakhel and Pekudei. What does this mean, a double portion? Well, I'm glad you asked. We have 54 Parshiot, or selections from the Torah, and we only have about 50 to 51 weeks, or Shabbats, in a non-leap Hebrew year, which is a year like this year. We're not in a leap year. So if we only have 50 to 51 weeks to read a Torah portion, and we also have a few situations where a holiday lands on Shabbat, so we read that holiday's Torah reading, we need to double up in order to get through all 54. So this is one of the lucky weeks where we have both Parshiot, a lot to get through. So this week's Parsha opens with the idea of Shabbat. God presents Shabbat to us. You shall not kindle a fire in your home, and you shouldn't work and rest on this seventh day. And then immediately after, we are introduced to the donations for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle that's being built in the desert. Again, there's a difference between the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash. The Beit HaMikdash is the final resting place, like the singular place in Jerusalem. The western wall, the Kotel in Jerusalem, is a part of the Beit HaMikdash. But in the desert, we had a sort of temporary tabernacle, a moving tabernacle, a Mishkan. So both Mishkan and Mikdash come from the Hebrew word Shechina. We've talked about this before. God's sort of feminine dwelling, and in the Mishkan is where God dwells. God dwells amongst us in the Mishkan. So a few Parshiot ago, we were talking about all the ingredients, all the materials that were needed to build the Mishkan, a lot of like specifics with this kind of wood and this has how long it should be and this kind of fabric, and it should only be, this much, a lot of that kind of stuff. And this week we are seeing how it's actually being built, because of course God could have just dropped a fully made Mishkan into the desert. Totally could have. But that's not what happened. Why? Why wouldn't God just drop a fully made Mishkan? It would have saved everyone a lot of time. So, like I said, we've talked about this idea before, but when we make things ourselves, we feel a huge sense of ownership, of responsibility, of connection to it. So when you make something from IKEA, I know I've given this example before, when you make something from IKEA, it's yours and you're really proud of it, and you might make an Instagram. I've literally seen multiple Instagram posts where people are like, wife me up. I'm a handy gal. Like, you made a table from IKEA. You know what? I get it. If I would have built the Mishkan, I would have felt, a sort of possession over it too. Anything like that, we feel possession over. And so in order for us to feel a connection to the Mishkan, a connection to the place where God's presence dwells, we had to build the Mishkan ourselves. Okay, so how was it built? It's built entirely by donations. We are told that Moshe tells the people, God told me that everyone who is of generous heart, who is of nadiv lev, of giving, willing heart, should give to the Mishkan. Okay, of giving heart. Well, I don't know, didn't we learn that you're supposed to give even when you don't feel like it? Well, the idea of even saying that it should be people with willing hearts is that there should be no one who's giving begrudgingly. Why? Why does that make such a big deal? Because the Shekhinah, the presence of God, like we said, is a main ingredient to the Mishkan. There's sort of this, I guess you could say that God's Shekhinah, God's presence, is the super glue to the rest of the tangible creations and things that are brought in. So if everyone's bringing in this golden menorah and this piece of woven wool to cover this thing and this piece of wood, they all could be held together by different objects and things, but they're really held together by the divine contribution of God, the Trumat Hashem, the divine contribution of God that holds it all together like divine superglue or divine brick mortar, if you will. And we are told not only do we have to be generous of heart, but if you're going to be the skilled artisans that are putting together the Mishkan, you must also be of wise heart. So we're Nadiv Lev and Hacham Lev, generous of heart and wise of heart. Okay, well, wise of heart, to me, when I hear that, I think of people who are like smart or who have emotional intelligence. So well, what does that really mean? Our interpreters tell us that wise of heart doesn't just mean people who are super smart and scholars. It also means people who have fear of God, who have fear of heaven, Yirat Shamayim, as we're told, awe of heaven. So you can be a super skilled, smart person, and you can be a skilled artisan or whatever, but you also could just be a regular person who fears God and is a good person. I like this idea. It's very inclusive. In order to be Hacham Lev, you are someone who has these qualities, this kernel of ability inside of you, but you didn't know that you had the full ability until you were put in a situation to elevate it. So an example that immediately came to mind for me was in The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy goes to Glinda and she says, Glinda, please help me. And Glinda says, you don't need my help anymore. You've always had the way to get home. Dorothy always knew the way to get home. She had to think about home and want to be there and click her heels 3 times. And the Scarecrow and the Lion and the Tin Man are like, what the heck? Why did you make us literally go through this very traumatic experience? And she's like, well, you wouldn't believe me before. whatever. I would have believed her. But the idea is that people don't pull out this kernel of ability unless they're in the situation to elevate it. So, in order to build a Mishkan, you can be wise, you can be not so wise. You can have skills, you can not have some skills. But overall, anyone who's able to contribute can contribute. You don't have to be giving your absolute best, or it doesn't have to be your absolute best to be worthy of sharing. So I think about this a lot when I make these videos, when I make my Dvar Torah podcast and email. Sometimes I'm like, this isn't my best work, but it's Thursday and got to send it out. So it's not my best work, but it's worth sharing. If you know Aleph, if you know the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, you should teach Aleph. And if someone else knows Bet, they can teach you Bet. But we all have so much to give. It doesn't matter where you are, what level you are. If you know Aleph, and you should teach Aleph. I believe that so fully. So Shabbat Shalom. I hope you internalize these ideas. And may we all build the Mishkan together, regardless of our abilities and skills. Shabbat Shalom.